What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Episode 5 of Season 2 of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, a show which admittedly I don't really like that much. However, just to start this video off on a positive note, I'm going to say something a little strange. I hope it gets all 5 seasons, and I hope it never gets canceled. Not because I enjoy watching it. I mean, I think the show is just a big, steaming pile of doggy doo-doo. However, a weird, indirect side effect of this show has been my discovery of Charlie Hopkinson's YouTube channel, a deepfake parody channel which features what might be the best comedy related to J.R.R. Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings that we will ever see. And the gist of his channel is really simple. With the help of a little technology, Charlie plays the roles of Gandalf, Elrond, and Boromir, sitting on the couch, watching shows and movies based on J.R.R. Tolkien and talking shit about what they're watching as well as each other, just like, normal friends do. However, in the case of this channel, the characters are in character like from the movies, but they also have the full knowledge, like a comprehensive knowledge of the books and all the various adaptations, and it's just fucking hilarious. And this past weekend, while I was traveling to and from North Carolina, I must have watched several hours of his videos and just cracking up every step of the way. And the good news is he's being discovered, or he's being recognized for his efforts. He's almost at 1 million subscribers. So head over to his channel, check out some of his videos, and give him a subscribe. Maybe we can get him up and over 1 million subscribers before the end of this season, because from my point of view, there are a ton of people out there who have an incredibly rich and detailed knowledge of J.R.R. Tolkien's books and all the various adaptations, but there's a very, very short list of people who can convert that knowledge and expertise into divine comedies. So anyway, like I said, there is a silver lining, or a positive side to this Rings of Power phenomenon, but let's start unpacking this episode. In past videos about it, I've criticized it left and right about what I regard as like blender storytelling, where you take a bunch of different details and scenes from movies and or books, throw them in the blender, pour them out, see what happens. For me, that's not screenwriting. That's just, I don't know what you call it, but anyway, it's blender storytelling. But mercifully, this episode had very little of it, or if it was there, I didn't catch it. Once again, even the very wise cannot see all ends, as J.R.R. Tolkien famously said. However, it seems like there are some people out there who do like blender storytelling, or they don't quite understand that there's like a deeper, richer story to be enjoyed apart from just randomly assembling a bunch of things that are vaguely kind of sort of recognizable as Tolkien. I got a very weird response to my last review, and do not harass this person. I have a feeling he's just a child who doesn't know yet that he has bad taste. We all have bad taste at a certain point in our lives. Like when I was 16, I thought Universal Soldier was the absolute peak of film culture, and then over time I learned that I was wrong. But I got this response where he said, "We get Ents, Balrog, Shelob, the creation of Mordor, and all people can do is bitch and complain. I'm 100% convinced if Peter Jackson's first trilogy came out today, social media would have torn them apart. People today are miserable." And the way I responded was that people did, in fact, rip apart Peter Jackson's movies when they came out. However, there was a much larger audience that loved and adored them. Like, for me, like The Return of the King. It's a mixed bag. It's uneven. It's got a lot of different ingredients that I don't like. However, I saw it 6 times in the theater. My love for the good stuff exceeded my hatred for the bad stuff. And so there's nothing wrong with criticizing things that you love. But this idea of just like you can just throw Ents, the Balrog, the Shelob, and the creation of Mordor like willy-nilly into a story, whether they belong there or not, I think that's part of the, I guess, the confusion or the discrepancy between those who are enjoying the show and those who are just eating it alive. Because for me, like, J.R.R. Tolkien is not a sandbox. It's not a fictional setting where people can kind of pop in and out and tell their own stories the way you would see with like Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics for many, many decades is a fictional setting, and they would invite in writers and artists, and they would flesh out that world with ongoing stories. Great, marvelous, wonderful.
Good, great, grand, wonderful.
But with J.R.R. Tolkien, it's either adapt what he wrote or leave it alone. And there are exceptions, obviously, like the video games Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War take ridiculous liberties with the text. However, anytime you get to a cutscene or a cinematic where they're just taking it to strange places, you can just skip and get back to the gameplay, because in the end, it's the atmosphere and the style and the gameplay of those games that makes them memorable. But when it comes to the first, the second, and the third age of Middle-earth, J.R.R. Tolkien, luckily, gave us a lot of really cool stories that we can obsess over for the rest of our lives. And if you want to make a show or a movie based on his work, adapt what he gave us to the best of your ability, or leave it alone. And if you want to tell fresh new stories or create fan fiction, create your own books, create your own shows from scratch, do the heavy lifting, and who knows, some of those people might end up becoming the next R. Scott Bakker. Where are his books? Somewhere around here. Oh, right up here. Or it's Baker. I always call it Bakker because it's Bakker, but apparently it is Baker. Or you might become the next Joe Abercrombie. Like we do need new fantasy authors. Like right now I'm reading the Jim Butcher series of the Dresden Files, which is modern day, but with fantasy and vampires and horror and wizards and that sort of thing. And so I just feel like the world of fantasy is always waiting for and hoping for great new authors. People don't need to just like butcher J.R.R. Tolkien stuff if his stories don't fit into the style of storytelling they wish to employ, like in this episode. Because the wholesale slaughter or butchery of Tolkien's books and or the heavy lifting and borrowing from Jackson's interpretation, like that's the least of my concerns with this show. It's just a bad show from any objective point of view where it doesn't know how to do the basics. Like you need great heroes and you need great villains and you need to look forward to watching them clash. But this cast, I mean, especially in this past episode, episode 5, it just feels like a cast that would be a better fit for like, I don't know, like a show set in high school where you have bullies like Kemen and Arian, if I'm saying their names correctly, kind of just like talking shit to people and being petty. I mean, I keep debating what is the worst storyline in The Lord of the Rings of Power, but it's got to be the storylines in Numenor, because if you read like the last like 30 or 40 pages of the Silmarillion, you get to see every little grisly detail about how Numenor, over many, many centuries, slowly but surely got embroiled in civil war, where you had those people who resented their mortality and wanted to sail west and try to conquer the Undying Lands. A foolhardy endeavor, but as we've seen in all the dream sequences from Season 1, Numenor does eventually get destroyed by the Valar. And then you have those Numenorians like Elendil and his sons Anarion and Isildur, who sail east to found the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, and they team up with the elves to beat the pants off Sauron once and for all. But it takes centuries upon centuries upon centuries. It's not just like a few little petty grievances that slowly create the spark for what appears to be kind of a ridiculous petty civil war or culture war within Numenor. But the good news is, no matter how wretched I might find the scenes in Numenor to be, at least this episode did not give us any scenes featuring Nori, Poppy, or Theo. I think those are my 3 least favorite characters in the show, but every episode presents fresh competition on that front. Like, who are the weakest characters in this show and who are the strongest? Like, if somebody put a gun in my mouth and said, name one character in this show that you like or you look forward to their stories, who would that be? Like, who is the MVP in this ridiculous show? Maybe Elrond. I mean, I can't stand the way they've portrayed Elrond, and also just the way they've talked about his ancestry and that sort of thing. But at least I don't want to projectile vomit out my nose every time he says something. And in a weird way, maybe I like Galadriel up in that level as well, because even though I can't stand their interpretation of the character and I can't stand, everything about her, there's something just like kind of inherently charismatic about Morfydd Clark. But once again, we are talking like the least of the worst, not the best of the best. But yeah, Nori, Poppy, Theo. I can't even remember the name of the characters in Numenor. I wrote it down. Hang on, where are they? Arian and Kemen. Once again, they're invented for the show. I don't even know how you're supposed to pronounce those characters, but oh my God. I'm getting sidetracked. Let's talk about something different. Let's talk about the dwarves and King Durin and Prince Durin and the use of the 7 dwarven rings this episode, because if you're into dwarven culture and dwarven lore, this episode gave us a lot on that front. And I've got my fair share of complaints about these storylines and these characters in Khazad-dûm. However, it must be said, these storylines are vastly superior to what we see unfolding in Numenor. But we get a lot of scenes of King Durin using the ring, and I thought a lot of these scenes were just basically missed opportunities. Like, instead of showing him discovering, great riches and great minerals, and but at the same time threatening the foundations of Khazad-dûm and/or leading to the discovery of the Balrog, which I'll get to in a sec, because the Balrog should not be in this show. But they seem to be totally enthralled by the fact that if they go to the edge of their kingdom and poke a hole in it that sunlight will go through. Like, if I walked around my apartment with the blinds pulled, in the dark, and with a pickaxe hit a hole in my wall and the sun came out, I'd be like, oh, I didn't know the sun was out there. I expect that an entire culture devoted to mining and delving and engineering and architecture, they would know where the walls are, where are the edges of the mountain, and where are they not. But like, oh, I didn't know that if we went out this side that there would be sun there. That seems to be totally ridiculous. but not nearly as ridiculous as the scene where Disa chases a little rolling bauble out of a marketplace, only to discover the bellowing of the Balrog. First and foremost, she's not nearly as I guess she doesn't provide nearly as much comic relief as the show seems to think that she does when she's like yelling at the passerbys or bumping into people. I find her antics to be, well, whatever is the opposite of comedy. It's not tragedy, but it's certainly tragic when you're watching it. But it's like she walks into this chamber and she's like, oh my God, I didn't know this was here. It's like you only walked like 10 yards out of the market. I would assume a marketplace has people going to and from on a daily basis. But if you just happen to walk like in one direction, like, I didn't know this was here. It's like, don't dwarves live hundreds of years? Isn't this your home? Shouldn't you know that chamber is there? And then she starts hearing the Balrog like roaring off in the distance. Like, I would assume some other people from the market going to and from would have also heard it. It would not be this big, giant surprise. But when in doubt, always go back to the text written by J.R.R. Tolkien. And in the appendices to The Lord of the Rings, the piece of material that Amazon bought the rights to, he provides timelines for the first, second, and third age. And in the timeline to the third age, I'm just going to read a little progression. So in the year 1976 of the third age, thousands of years after the events that we're seeing in the show, we see Aranath takes the title of chieftain of the Dunedain. The heirlooms of Arnor are given into the keeping of Elrond. In the year 1977, Frumgar leads the Eothed into the north. In 1979, Buka of the Marsh becomes the first Thane of the Shire. And then in the year 1980, the Witch King comes to Mordor and there gathers the Nazgul. A Balrog appears in Moria and slays Durin the Sixth. And then in the year 1981, Nain the First is slain, the dwarves flee from Moria, many of the Sylvan elves of Lorien flee south, Amroth and Nimerdale are lost, and then in the year 1999, we're going to party like it's 1999, Thrain the First comes to Erebor and founds a dwarf kingdom under the mountain. So there you have it, some pretty cool, interesting stuff about how the dwarves lost the kingdom of Khazad-dûm, but it's in the third age, and this story is about the second age. So it's like, go back to the text and see what Tolkien wrote about that period and adapt that. Stop stealing characters from the third age or scenes from the third age, trying to spice up your second age or your second age adaptation. And it just seems like, going back to this idea of blender storytelling, that the writers of this show, I always forget their names, Adam McKay and J.D. Payne, or what the hell are their fucking names? All right, here it is. J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, my two least favorite storytellers working in entertainment today, and they have plenty of healthy competition on that front. But they seem to be operating under the assumption that any story that takes place in Middle-earth at any time needs to have all these familiar ingredients. And it's like, no, there are a bunch of different stories that unfolded in Middle-earth over the first, second, and third age. Not all of them have to have the same beats or, dramatic payoffs. But let's say we wanted to be charitable, or we wanted to be accommodating to these lackluster storytellers. If they were hell-bent upon including the Balrog, no matter what, once again, I still feel like if he were just screaming and bellowing in this giant chamber or nearby this chamber to a marketplace where people are going to and from every day, it wouldn't be just Disa who is hearing this, but what else do we got going on here? Oh, Durin removes all the delving restrictions, and he starts getting paranoid about the ring, and how he keeps talking about how it's heavy when it's on, but he assumes people want to take it when he takes it off. And I guess that was depicted in a semi-compelling fashion. But what I didn't like was how he starts saying that if the other dwarven lords want to claim the other 6 rings, that they're going to have to give half of their riches to him. And Tolkien's a little vague when it comes to the dwarven rings and how they help the dwarven lords, grow their wealth. I always assumed that basically, just like we see in the show, that it just makes you a little bit better at finding gold and rare ores and minerals and that sort of thing. But I never thought it would be, they become greedy and start taxing their neighbors, but I'm not going to rake them over the coals for that. But if you have one of the 7 dwarven rings, it definitely increases the rate at which you accumulate your various riches. But the far weaker storyline this episode was the one featuring Celebrimbor and Annatar, a.k.a. Sauron, as they like to say in this show. And let's just start with Celebrimbor. Has there ever been a bigger dumbass who is more susceptible to flattery than Celebrimbor in this show? It's like, you could catch him like twisting the head off a puppy, but if you say, but Celebrimbor, your robes look so nice today, but really? Okay, and he would just kind of wander off, but like, all it takes is like the slightest compliment about his looks or his abilities or his wisdom or whatever, and it's like, Annatar can go about, doing what he does, but it's like, can't there be at least like a little bit of subtlety? Like, I would love it if they could portray Annatar as this incredibly charismatic, diabolical villain who's a master at manipulating people into doing things that they should not. But it's like, oh, like, don't look at my hand over here while I'm like, slitting the throat of your mother because I complimented the shade of your eyes today. But the big source of tension this episode is whether or not to construct the 9 rings for mortal men doomed to die. And at one point, Anatar just starts casually throwing out a bunch of names as examples of mortal men who haven't been completely corruptible, etc., and so forth. But he throws out Arundel as one of the examples. Arundel is the father of Elrond. But Arundel was not human. He was half-elf. He was the son of Tuor, or T-U-O-R. I've never actually said it all. Tuor. In any case, Tuor was a man. Princess Idril was the daughter of Turgon, who ruled the kingdom of Gondolin. And if you want to know, more about Gondolin, start with John Howe's incredible painting about the fall of Gondolin, but also read the Silmarillion, where it's like one of the darkest and bleakest chapters, where we see this incredible kingdom going down in flames as both dragons and Balrogs attack it. But Arendel's the father of Elrond. He's a half-elf, so he was a strange example to be included. But Tuor was a guy, as well as Beren, who they mention, who is one of the kind of like the heroes or idols of, or ancestors of Aragorn. And he's always telling stories about Beren and how he relates to Beren's stories of falling in love with an elf because Aragorn's in a similar situation. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked or too nerdy. At least they acknowledge that Arundel exists, but he's technically a half-elf. But we have a lot of really strange scenes between Anatar and Celebrimbor where like they're trying to resize the rings because Anatar basically announces, well, I'm going to make the rings without you, whether you like it or not. But things just start floating around the forge, and I was like, is this a Harry Potter show or is this a Lord of the Rings show? It just seemed a little too silly, a little too juvenile, and slowly but surely Anatar's trying to persuade Celebrimbor into thinking that the reason the Dwarven rings are kind of corrupting or turning their wearers into people that are greedy and evil is because Celebrimbor lied to Gil-galad in his letter, basically saying like, I'm being a good boy, I'm following your orders, blah blah blah, I'm not making any rings over here, and that because of his inherent dishonesty in that act, that it's imbued the 7 rings, and so the way they're going to kind of redeem themselves or like wash themselves clean of this sin is by making 9 more rings, in spite of the fact that the people working on the 9 rings are starting to like step into the shadow realm and like see things like wraiths. Obviously, wraiths will come much later, but there are plenty of ominous signs that this is a bad idea. But even when one of these workers comes to Anatar and complains about the fact that she's stepping into the shadow realm while working on these rings, he's like, you know what? You're looking pretty hot today. You remind me of my girlfriend, Galadriel. And she's like, oh, really? And then she just forgets all about it. Like, I'm sorry, that's not enough to disguise or distract people from the fact that what they're doing is obviously like triggering a lot of alarm bells and a lot of weird side effects. But once again, it's like whether you're talking to Celebrimbor or the people working on the rings, all it takes is a few little like very transparent words of flattery, and they just like their hearts beat all aflutter and they get back to work. And also, it's just bizarre that they continue to try to nurture this love affair between Sauron and Galadriel. I know that there are people who watch this show hoping and praying that Sauron and Galadriel will eventually get it on. Spoiler alert, they don't. However, if this show by the end of season 2 gives us some great X-rated outrageous sex scene between Galadriel and Sauron, I'll watch it. But I guess I can't wrap up this video without at least acknowledging some of the lackluster scenes unfolding in Numenor, where we have this scene where it's one of the oldest elven shrines in Numenor, and they're having a little ceremony and just chilling. When suddenly the douchebag son of Ar-Pharazôn comes stumbling in. He's like, "We need room for our aqueduct. This shrine's going to be torn down." I mean, yeah, I think I keep forgetting his name because he's so inconsequential. Karen, what the hell is this goddamn name? I write it down and then it immediately slips from my brain because Kemen is a forgettable character, but he ends up stabbing, and once again I've forgotten the name of the person that he stabbed. He stabs Valandil in the back when Valandil steps in to try to defend Elendil. But anyway, Elendil's been arrested as a traitor, blah blah blah. I guess my question is whether or not this show will ever do the storyline where the Numenorians go to Middle-earth and claim Sauron and bring him back to Numenor. That might happen in season 3, but I hope they won't show Numenor's complete and total downfall without that key ingredient, because for people who have read the Silmarillion, they'll know that there's a long period of time where Sauron is brought back to Numenor as a prisoner, but then he starts kind of sowing the seeds of discontent and getting people to worship Morgoth and that sort of thing. Or in the case of this show, I'm sure he'll just say, isn't that a nice suit of armor you're wearing today? And everybody, oh my God, he complimented me, blah, 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 blah. In any case, the episode draws to a close as we see this army of orcs closing in on Eregion as Elrond is running through the woods, like ripping off little pieces of clothing to lighten his load so he can be even faster. It reminded me of Chevy Chase in Vacation, walking around the desert with his pants on his head, like ripping off his watch and continuing on his way. But when Elrond gets to Gil-galad, Gil-galad's like, well, we cannot hope to defeat the armies of Adar and Sauron. It's like, how do you know? Like, in the context of this show, Mordor's been around for like 5 days. It might be an army of like 100 orcs. Like at this time, like the elves are flourishing and have they have incredible sophistication and armies and cities and so on and so forth. They should be able to steamroll right over Adar, or even if they couldn't, they would probably at least still make the attempt, but Gil-galad shouldn't be so defeatist in his attitude. But don't worry, we still have Galadriel within the camp as she has a little exchange with Adar, who says, like, oh, we share a common enemy, blah, blah, blah. I don't know where they're going with this. I hope they will kill the character of Adar before the end of season 2, because he doesn't even belong in the story, and at no point is Sauron ever subservient to him or worried about him. Like basically at the end of the first age when Morgoth is overthrown, there's a very brief window where Sauron kind of goes into hiding and wonders whether or not maybe I should just say sorry and go back to the Undying Lands and take my punishment. But instead, he just slowly rebuilds his strength until he's ready to start making mischief upon the world again. But if through this unholy alliance that Adar is proposing to Galadriel, she ends up cutting his throat during the season 2 finale, that at least will lead to all things kind of more or less being set on a better path with Sauron back in control of all the orcs of Middle-earth. Like the orcs of Middle-earth, who should be chopping up the bodies of their enemies and eating their flesh, not cuddling with their babies and wondering whether or not to go to war. Like orcs in Middle-earth do not sit around drinking green tea and like talking about the environment on mountaintops. They are bloodthirsty savages who like to destroy and eat and kill and look forward to the next town where they get to have the same privilege. The orcs definitely need to step up their game and show just how mean and nasty they can really be. So that's all I've got for this week. I look forward to seeing whatever hidden treasures might be contained within episode 6 next week. But for the time being, head over to Charlie Hopkinson's YouTube channel. You will laugh your balls off and you can thank me later. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. I would greatly appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.